Hi there, Thor owners. Today in your 2014 Thor Windsport, we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install SumoSprings Rebel Custom Helper springs for the front axle. And this is what our Sumo springs are going to look like when it's installed, when you've got your suspension lifted up. You can see that they are two separate pieces, which allows your suspension to have further range of travel. This is nice because your Sumo springs are never going to be fighting the rest of your suspension components when they need to separate apart. But when they collapse and come together, let's say whenever you go over a bump or pothole, the spring will compress here and provide additional support to the rest of your suspension, so you won't notice so much of that road shock inside the cabin. It also helps to minimize sway because the springs will be compressing, trying to push it back to its normal ride position. And since there's one on each side, as the motorhome wants to tip to one side, it'll push up. And once it gets up to the top and wants to go to the other side, the Sumo spring over there is ready to contact to push it back straight again. So this greatly minimizes how much back and forth rocking you've got. That helps to keep the items inside of your motorhome safe as you're going down the road, because you don't have so many rattling and doors opening and closing. But it also helps make it more comfortable for your passengers and easier to maintain control of the vehicle for you inside. Because before, when you were hitting those potholes, the vehicle might want to jerk to one side, and it's still going to do so, but it's not going to be nearly as much as it was before. So you won't be white-knuckled and exhausted when you get to your destination because you've been fighting to keep this motorhome on the road. Now, Sumo springs are only one enhancement that can help minimize sway and increase the stability of your vehicle. They're one of my best recommended upgrades if rocking and doors opening and closing is a real big issue. This helps out a lot with that. If you're wanting to further gain control of your motorhome to feel safer and not feel as fatigued when you get to your destination, in addition to Sumo springs, I would also recommend front and rear sway bars from Roadmaster. They're going to help minimize sway and help you maintain control. But another big one that's really going to help in the fatigue department is a steering stabilizer. That's going to help bring the steering wheel back to center, so when you do hit those potholes that are minimized on the impact you feel inside with these Sumo springs, the steering stabilizer is also going to assist you in pulling it back straight. All that together is going to give you the most enjoyable driving experience inside your motorhome. We're not going to take it out on our test course. We're going to see how our Sumo springs are going to react. And I expect to see some pretty drastic improvements here, as this is mostly going to affect sway back and forth as we're hitting a bump on this side, knocking us this way, and then knocking us back and forth. And it has made quite a bit of an improvement here inside. We feel more like we're just going up and down really than we are swaying left and right. So our components are working so well together, keeping us from rocking. We're now going to head into just the straight forward bump section, and we don't expect to see too much of a change here, as this is just forward and aft. There is going to be some minimal improvements, and it does feel a little bit smoother on the inside. And lastly, now we're going to head into the slalom section. And based on the way that it felt going over the uneven bumps, I can already tell we're definitely going to see some improvements here. And one of the biggest things that you're really looking for in the slalom here is how comfortable are you going into the slalom. If you're not very comfortable with it, then you're probably not really set up for evasive maneuvers like you would hope to be if you ever get into that situation. If you're comfortable going into the slalom, you're going to be able to react much more confidently in those emergency situations. We're going to get a little speed up here, and then we're going to head into the slalom now. And there is still a little bit of rock in there in the back, but it feels a lot more comfortable here on the inside. It definitely feels like we could make a quick maneuver and that we're not just all going to fly to that direction. I feel like I'm in a lot more control now than what we were before. You'll also notice with your steering stabilizer installed that the wheel wants to go back straight when you're in some turns. This helps us bring back to center, giving us some more control, and also reducing that fatigue. This is a pretty big wheel, and we're, especially in parking lots and turning around and things, you have to turn the wheel quite a bit, and it's a big motorhome. So the assistance of it coming back to center just takes all that effort off of you. The Sumo springs are going to be constructed of a microcellular urethane that's going to be resistant against UV rays, oils, and road grime, so you don't have to worry about the material breaking down over time. You'll be able to get this support for many years to come. These are designed for vehicles with a weight rating of 16 to 18,000 pounds. You'll receive everything that you'll need in your kit to get these installed. There's no drilling required. We'll just need to simply remove your old Jounce bumpers and they will bolt right up into place. Let's go over that installation together so you can have the confidence to do it at home. We'll begin our installation by lifting up our vehicle to let the front suspension hang. This is going to give us more room to work. You can use your leveling jacks to do so. And then once you've got it lifted up, you'll want to support it on the frame with jack stands because you don't want to work on it with just the hydraulic jacks holding it up. We're now underneath the vehicle on the driver's side, just above the front suspension. You'll see your Jounce bumper here. And we're going to remove that using a 13mm socket down the center, and then we can hold the nut on top with a 15mm wrench. You'll want to save your nut and bolt because we will be reusing it. We can now take one of the upper brackets that come in our kit. There's 2 holes on each side of this bracket. We're going to take the short bolts and drop them down through. The angled side is going to point towards the outside, like that. And then we're just going to use our factory nut and bolt that we removed from our Jounce bumper to secure this bracket right back to where the Jounce bumper used to be. There's little ears here on the back side. We want to make sure those are butted up against the inside of the frame here. That'll hold it in place. And we're just going to re-secure it using the same 13mm and 15mm that we used before. We can then take the upper Sumo spring portion. You'll know it's the upper because it's got the hollow bottom and it's got 4 bolts on top. These bolt holes will line up with the bolts that we drop down. It's going to be the ones that are spaced further apart. And we're just going to bring it up there and just thread it on there. It is a little bit difficult to line everything up, but just feel around and you'll be able to find it. I like to just get one bolt started on one side and then start the other side and then tighten them down. We're tightening them down using a 15mm wrench. We can now take our lower brackets and we are going to be placing them in this position, just like you see here. It's going to sit on top of your leaf spring. But we wanted to see how our lower bracket lines up with the upper bracket there. There's a hole on the bottom and that's going to line up with a hole in your plate here, and it looks like we're going to be using the outside hole. We'll then take the lower clamping portion of our bracket and we're going to slide it like this over our carriage bolts. And on the bottom, we're going to thread on a locking nut. We'll do that for both the carriage bolts here at the back. Then we're going to slide a bracket on the front ones and secure those with the same nuts on the longer carriage bolts. We can now go back and tighten down our nuts on our carriage bolts using a 9/16 socket. When tightening them down, you want to make sure you go back and forth between the 2 on each side of the leaf spring to make sure they tighten down evenly. And then we can come tighten down the front ones. All that's left on this side now is to line up your lower portion of your Sumo spring with the upper and then tighten down that lower bolt. One of the ways to make this easy is you can eyeball it lining it up here and then lower your vehicle back down so the weight of your top Sumo spring is pressing against the bottom. That'll line it up with the little cone here, and then you can just get in with a wrench underneath and snug the bolt down. We'll use our 15mm wrench again to tighten these down. And that completes our installation of SumoSprings Rebel Custom Helper Springs for the front axle on our 2014 Thor Windsport.